Properties of angles, lesson 22 notes, example number 2. Using the figure below, list all pairs of vertical angles, all pairs of adjacent angles, and find each angle measure. All right, so we're going to start with vertical angles. Vertical angles, remember, are across from one another. They only share a vertex. So let's look right here. Angle 1 and angle 4 are across from one another. Therefore, the first set, or the first pair of vertical angles is 1 and 4. Angles 2 and 3 are across from one another. Therefore, angle 2 and angle 3 are vertical angles. 5 and 8 are across from one another. Therefore, 5 and 8 are vertical angles. 6 and 7 are across from one another. They only share a vertex. Therefore, 6 and 7 are vertical angles. If you need to, pause your video, get that written down. All right, adjacent angles. Remember, adjacent angles are side by side. So angle 1 is side by side with angle 2 and side by side with angle 3. Therefore, angle 1 is adjacent to angle 2 and angle 3. Angle 2 is side by side with angle 4 and side by side with angle 1. Therefore, angle 2 is adjacent to angles 1 and 4. Angle 3 is side by side with angle 1 and side by side with angle 4. Therefore, angle 3 is adjacent to angle 1 and angle 4. Angle 4 is side by side with angle 2 and side by side with angle 3. Therefore, angle 4 is adjacent to angle 2 and angle 3. If you need to, go ahead, pause your video, and get all that written down. Okay, angle 5 is side by side with angle 6 and side by side with angle 7. Therefore, angle 5 is adjacent to angle 6 and angle 7. Angle 6 is side by side with angle 5 and side by side with angle 8. Therefore, angle 6 is adjacent to angle 5 and angle 8. Angle 7 is side by side with angle 5 and side by side with angle 8. Therefore, angle 7 is adjacent to angle 5 and angle 8. And then last, angle 8 is side by side with angle 6, side by side with angle 7. Therefore, angle 8 is adjacent to angle 6 and angle 7. Pause your video, get all that written down. Okay, now, to find the angle measurements, we're going to use two things. We're either going to use, in this case, adjacent angles, because these adjacent angles form straight lines, and therefore making them not only adjacent, but also a linear pair. And if they are a linear pair, that means they add up to 180. So we're going to use linear pairs and vertical angles. Remember, vertical angles are complementary, which means there's no math involved. 1 and 4 are vertical angles. So if angle 4 is 135 degrees, guess what? That means that angle 1 is also 135 degrees. Well, how do I find angle 2 and 3? I find angle 2 and angle 3 by using the fact that this is a straight line, which makes this angle here and this angle here a linear pair. They are adjacent, they form a straight line, so they are a linear pair. So what I would like you to do is up top here, I want you to write linear pair, which means to find the angle measurement, we're going to take 180 minus what we know, which is 135. And 180 minus 135 is 45. So angle 2 is 45 degrees. Well, angle 2 and angle 3, they are vertical angles. The only thing they share is a vertex. Vertical angles are congruent, so they're across from one another. If angle 2 is 45 degrees, then angle 3 is 45 degrees. And if you look at this, don't these two form a straight line? Yes, they would add up to 180. These two form a straight line. Yes, they add up to 180. These two form a straight line, and they add up to 180. So you actually have 4 pairs of linear pairs here. Here's a linear pair, here's a linear pair, here's a linear pair, and here's a linear pair. You have 4 pairs of linear pairs there. Go ahead, pause your video, get all that written down. Okay, the bottom. Angles 6 and 7 are across from one another. They are vertical angles. Vertical angles are congruent. So, if angle 6 is 50 degrees, then angle 7 is 50 degrees. These angles here, oops, let's try that again, are a linear pair. They form this straight line right here. And because they're a linear pair, again, they add up to 180. So I'm going to take 180 minus the given angle 50, and that's how I find my measure for angle 8. So 180 minus 50 is 130. Angle 5 and angle 8 are vertical angles. They are across one another. Vertical angles are congruent. So if angle 8 is 130 degrees, then angle 5 is 130 degrees. Okay, so pause your video if you need to get that written down. All right, the last thing to do is to write the angles that are congruent and their measurements. So let's start with angle 1. The measure of angle 1 and the measure of angle 4 both equal 135. So the measure of angle 1 equals the measure of angle 4, which equals 135 degrees. The measure of angle 2 and the measure of angle 3 equal 45 degrees. So the measure of angle 2 equals the measure of angle 3, which equals 45 degrees. 5 and 8 both equal 130. So the measure of angle 5 equals the measure of angle 8, which equals 130 degrees. And then 6 and 7 both equal 50, so the measure of angle 6 equals the measure of angle 7, which equals 50 degrees. Go ahead, pause your video, and get that written down. Okay, I know that was a lot of writing, but if you have any questions on example number 2, please let me know.